Okay, well, hi everybody. I'm James Burton, co-owner of Percy Ellis, along with Emery Daniels. We have been developing missing middle housing for 15 years and slowly grew from doing very tiny interior renovations, sometimes only partial, of single houses, and now we're doing mid-rise buildings of up to 100 units, and very slow progression though over the 15-year period. And so we have a lot of experience building and executing small projects, and they've taught us everything we know. And so Nama mentioned a single case study, but we're going to try to jam 3 in here and focus in on key learnings. One thing I just wanted to mention is I want this to be useful. So it's going to feel a little bit rushed, but at the end, there's contact information, and please reach out for supplemental information on these projects, more detailed information I'm happy to share, and for a future meeting with myself or Katie. But whatever we present today will just be a snippet, and I'd love to share with you more detailed information of each of these case studies for you to learn from them. So let's just get right into it then, everyone. The first project is, the 3 projects are 160 Lansdowne, 189 Sheridan, and 1553 to 1557 Bloor Street West. So last thing is there won't be any questions during, or let's not do questions during this presentation. I'm gonna fly through it and then we'll do questions at the very end. So here's 160 Lansdowne. It's a single family home that we converted into 4 apartments. It looks just still like a home. This is a picture of the completed project, and you can see some numbers on the screen here: the purchase price, the sale price, and the profit. But that's not so. There wasn't $1 million in profit. So the thing that I wanted to point out here is sometimes we can look at other projects or what other people are doing. We can make assumptions based upon things like looking at a purchase price of $600,000 and a sale price of $1.8 million and assume that it was, there was easily $1 million of profit in there. But, often it's not the case. There might be 0 because you don't know how many difficulties the project went through and how far off course that project may have gone from the initial projections. So this is a good example that I wanted to use in this presentation, because we did actually end up turning a profit of $340,000, which is a monumental home run. This is like one of the best, most profitable projects we've ever had in the history of our company of more than 30 projects. So the learning here is I chose this project because there's many challenges, but despite those challenges, we still did end up profitable. So I'd like to give you guys some confidence as well. This is a little snippet from 2015 of what I went out to my investors with. It's really not very sophisticated. This is it. You're looking at it. There's only 3 supplemental tabs in my spreadsheet at that time. And this is 9 years into this business for me. So 9 years into the business, this is all I was presenting really to my investor. It's really not very sophisticated or exciting. But that's because this isn't really the key ingredient to starting in this business. It's more around, the relationships, the ideas, the creativity, and the confidence you can instill in people who you want to partner with you. And, they'll judge you to some extent on your spreadsheet. If I was judged entirely on my spreadsheet, this wouldn't have been my 15th or 20th project, because it's not overly sophisticated. And on top of that, if you look a little closer, you'll see my cost estimation for this project at less than 1.1 million and 12 months. And if you look back and see the actual cost, we had a $250,000 cost overrun, and on my little 12-month estimation there turned into 30 months. So I was also completely wrong in pretty much every estimation I could have possibly put forth here. And we still ended up with the profit and a successful project. So let's look at some of the challenges that ended up in some of the issues. So one thing was pretty wild situation. We built a foundation for an addition and some walls above the foundation. I think we put a floor, which was going to become the second story. And all of a sudden we got a call and our permit was revoked. And this seemed completely unfair. They had issued us the building permit, the City of Toronto, and now they were revoking us and telling us to tear down our addition and move it 12 inches further away from the property line. This seemed completely, unfair. And we considered suing the city for the cost. And we were then advised this is a very bad idea. If we intend to continue working in this city, we don't want to be the group that sued the city. So we just sucked it up and we tore down the addition and out the foundation and moved it 12 inches further away from the property line and moved forward. On top of that, they refused to reissue our permit with the building length because the grandfathering of the building length was no longer there because we'd torn down the previous addition to build the one that was then torn down. And so we'd lost our grandfathering for our building length. This one, though, we felt was even more unfair, and we pursued a argument for this for several months of additional delay, and we did eventually get that one reissued at that building length. But these are some of the incredibly unfair things that can happen during a small project like this that you kind of have to be aware of and deal with. So the project went from 12 months to 30 months because of these things and other things. So somewhere in there, we were feeling the heat about whether or not we were going to be able to make a profit or be profitable here. Our cost was exceeding our expected value, which was only 1.172 million at the very beginning. So we decided to split the main floor into 2 units, one small bachelor in the back, and then that was shrinking the size of the unit in the front, but it added a higher per square foot rent. And we did this without the zoning approval, only with only making sure we did our safety and fire codes up to date. And we were going to go and get the zoning done after. In the end, we sold the property while we were waiting for our committee of adjustment date. So, and the owner took it as a legal 3 unit. And so, sometimes this is sort of a strategy. You kind of must go ahead and make a change prior to getting your approval to make that change in a jam in order to, get yourself out of a potential cost overrun. So what's the moral of the story here? Well, relationships with neighbors, you cannot underestimate how important it is to develop good relationships with your neighbors. It was our neighbor who made it their life's mission to get that permit revoked. And they basically went down to the city and sat outside the chief building official's door until, they revoked that permit. So we initially tried to develop a good relationship with this neighbor. We bucketed them into the unreasonable category, which we as developers tend to do too quickly, instead of sitting down and trying to understand why they're saying things like they don't care that we're going to renovate and boost values, or they don't care that we're adding housing, or that, you tend to think, oh, you're unreasonable and therefore, we simply can't develop a relationship with you. It's impossible. But we've since this time learned you can never stop trying. You must go into that with more of an open mind and be more patient and dig deeper into the root of the issues. Sometimes the issues are not what they seem to be. Sometimes the issue is they just expect you as a developer not to listen to them and not to care. And if you actually listen and you actually care, that alone can change the nature of the relationship, and you can build from that foundation. And then profit isn't everything. So while this project was profitable, we still had tremendous challenges in the middle of it. And the big learning I want to share with you guys here is and I know you've touched on this in the last 2 days, but your agreements with your investors, they can say whatever you want. It's up to you. There's no real template for this. And one of the things we did to attract investment for the first decade of our careers was agree to cover all cost overruns, giving capital certainty to our investors. So I'm not saying you should do this. This could be a bad idea for a lot of people, but for us, it was a way to more easily attract the capital. And we had sort of planned for being able to cover these instances, but we didn't plan to cover 250,000. If we look back to we had intended for our investor to invest 95% of the total capital requirement of 247,000, and our input would be just $12,000 into this project. We ended up at $260 something thousand invested in this project, more than our investor. So while we were profitable, we had other financial related problems throughout the project, and explaining to our investor the delays. Of course, they're not that comfortable with you covering these overruns because it's still overall challenging the ultimate profitability. So the last big learning here was don't panic and don't stop. And I think in our society and in this business, people tend to tell you to sort of rethink everything all the time, constantly re-strategize. But sometimes you got to just kind of put your head down and go forward and trust your initial instinct on a project, because there's always going to be what appear to be game-changing problems and delays and cost overruns that make you think, oh, should we stop this entirely? Should we rethink this? Should we sort of basically sell this asset? Is it saleable right now? And we've done that, and it's never worked out for us, and we've always regretted it. And so our biggest successes have been when we've just pushed through our problems. So that's the first case study. And again, I want to stress, I'd love to share more detailed information with you guys about any of these projects or anything that's coming across as unclear, or I'm not trying to glaze over anything. So please ask the questions at the end, and also request the information from us at the end of this conversation through the contact information. The next project I wanted to discuss is 189 Sheridan. So this is a project in the best location that we'd ever done a project to this date. And it came up on my radar because it was in a fire and it was well priced, and it turned out there was a death in the fire, and this was causing a lot of people not to want to get involved for obvious reasons. So I did a little quick checking with some lawyers. I really couldn't establish certainty of the risk one way or the other, but I established some idea that we wouldn't be held responsible anyway. So we proceeded with an unconditional offer on a house that we weren't allowed to access, had fire work orders attached to it, there was a death in it, and that was how we acquired this property for a good price. No one else was willing to go in totally unconditional. Well, actually, just to finish that thought, we did end up getting named in a lawsuit by the family of the deceased. Our title insurance handled the lawyer fees for us. And after about a year and a half, we were removed from the lawsuit because really we shouldn't have been on it, but this is the legal system. And this is why sometimes the delay or the risk of being involved is just being involved in the legal situation, not necessarily ultimately being held responsible. So it was a good learning, but at the end of the day, I probably wouldn't change my mind. I'd probably proceed even knowing we were going to get named in the lawsuit. We did have our fees covered. So this was quite the project for us because everything was so rushed and hasty in the acquisition. We weren't even fully aware of what this meant, this gray sort of area of the zoning that we were inside of. We didn't know the full implication. Our initial intent with this project was just to build units within the house, repair the fire damage, remove the fire-related work orders, restructure it as necessary, and work within it. But then when we did some digging on this zoning, we found out we could do a 4-story as of right multifamily mini apartment building here. It was exciting, and so we acquired an architect, new relationship, and said, go ahead and get us this permit for these 4 units, 4 stories. Our interpretation of the bylaw is you should be able to do this. And so he was hesitant, but he agreed, and he ran into troubles in acquiring this permit, and we were quite hard on him in that the troubles he was having, we were feeling like he should be able to get this permit. And in retrospect, I look back and think we were too hard on him because we may have ultimately got this permit when we shouldn't have. There were definitely some variances that we were able to squeeze around, and partly I think it's because we were so adamant with our architect about this achieving this 4-story. But the relationship disintegrated throughout this project, and we didn't manage it very well. And I think our expectations were too high, and so that's the learning there. And in this case, it worked out. He got us this permit for a 4-story as of right project, but it was there was a lot of friction, and So in the end, we all of a sudden we had this permit. We'd never built something 4 stories in the past, and we were informed of the difference between 4 stories and 3 stories, and it's a huge difference. And some 95% of structures in Canada and the world are 3 stories and below, all houses. And there's a different part of the Ontario Building Code managing 3 and below, Part 9, and there's a Part 3 of the Building Code managing 4 stories and above. And so we sort of got some quotes from a more professional construction company at the beginning of this project, and they came in extremely high, and it was very shocking, and it was not fitting within our estimated costs. And so then we went to our subtrades that we've been using for years, and they weren't capable of building 4-story. They weren't comfortable with framing a 4-story structure with the different. So we were sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And my business partner, who's a little bit less, more risk averse, suggested we just chop off the 4th story, build the 3, and go on with things. And I was arguing for, no, let's go with the 4th story. Let's figure out how to do this, and we'll let the additional GFA kind of make up for our challenges along the way. And we agreed, and that's how we proceeded. But it was difficult to acquire trades. We had to form new trade relationships, and some of the relationships that we used from the past struggled through the project slowly. Sometimes we had to replace a few guys because they weren't capable of getting us through. Well, at the bottom of the slide, so how did we build it? Well, we struggled through it for 2.5 years, and ended up finishing it. And this is just a image of shoring piles that we had to, for the first time, we had to deal with shoring. It's just one example of a first on the project. What are the lessons here that I would like to pass along? One is, I think you have to take unknown risks in this business in order to move forward with these small projects. And one thing about the small projects is often the risks are sort of smaller. The projects are smaller, the risks are smaller, and you kind of got to take some. And everyone perceives risks differently, and you may be perceiving risks that others don't, or that don't even exist. But at the end of the day, you're always going to feel like there's some risk involved in these decisions that you make, and you're going to have to just kind of like go ahead with them at times. The other second one is maximize the GFA. Now, I feel like this is a controversial lesson to be passing along, because what maximizing GFA comes along with in our history of more than 20, 30 projects is delays and construction difficulties and complications and cost overruns. Because when you're maximizing GFA, you're also potentially creating more opposition in your neighborhood and community that you need to deal with. You're also probably complicating construction and below grade works. And so our vision always was to go ahead and maximize the GFA, and then allow the extra GFA to allow us to make the mistakes and go through the challenges that we felt we would inevitably run into no matter what project we had done. But I think there's an alternative way, and I know we've had projects where we have not maximized GFA. They've still been successful. They haven't been our most successful projects, and so I think, though, they have been more managed on a more correct or more stringent time frame. So it's a lesson I'd like to pass along, that sometimes when you maximize your GFA, you can erase the challenges and problems you might run into, but it is certainly not the only way to proceed through small projects. There is definitely a way in which you can be more strategic and keep things in your comfort zone and proceed with more certainty. And the third is the same as on the last project. Sometimes you just have to push through the problems and not think too hard about them, and not re-strategize, and not change your mind or panic sell. And panic selling is the absolute worst thing you can do. And we have done it, and it's never worked for us. It's always caused some kind of a loss of profit or an actual loss of capital. Okay, we're going to move on to the last one. Each one was getting bigger. I do kind of want to point out at this point in the presentation that these 3 projects were all pretty late in our early career. Emery and I started in 2006, 7, 8, kind of dabbling and full time by, say, 2009, and these projects weren't until 2015, 16, ish. So we're quite far along into our career. Our earlier projects were not as advanced and complicated as these. They were much smaller, and there's a number of them. And I'd be happy to share some more details on them as well. But this is another great project to discuss. So this was again a scale up for us, and but it had a lot of options, and that's why we thought it was a project we could scale up on. It was sort of basically 3 houses instead of 1, but it wasn't vacant land. For example, the next scale up for us after this project, around the same time, maybe 6 to 12 months later, was a vacant piece of land. There's no option there. You either approve a development and build it, or you get yourself probably into financial trouble. So it's a one-way path. This project here was multiple directions. We had the option of assembling 5 lots around these 3 and creating a much larger development site, which we could sell to another developer. We actually ended up tying up 4 of the other sites, but the 5th just was an impossible situation, and it killed the whole plan of assembly. But we always had the option of renovating the 3 houses just in their existing form into houses or into small multifamily projects. We also had the option of doing what we did at Sheridan, which is ultimately what we did do. You can kind of see on the right, there are actually 3 sixplexes. It's not one 18-unit building, it's 3 separately individually titled sixplexes. But we could have also just tore these 3 down and built one 5-story mid-rise, for example, similar to what we did at 41 River, which we're not discussing in detail on this project. So some key learnings on Bloor were the great idea was the optionality of the scale up. Then we decided we'd try this development loophole, which is you can add 1 unit with 1 building permit in the city of Toronto without paying a development charge. This is a very key thing for missing middle housing. It's something everybody needs to be aware of. If you have purchased a 2-unit property, you can make a 3rd unit without paying a development charge. And it's a really key thing for missing middle housing, because these development charges can harm the viability of small projects. So, but the other thing is you can take that loophole a little too far and open up multiple building permits in succession. Open one with 1 unit and close it, and then open another building permit with another unit without a DC and close it, and another. And if you imagine in this case with 3 separately titled lots, you could do this 3 at a time, multiple times. And this seemed like an idea for us to make this project certainly viable. However, it ended up costing as much as it saved, pretty much, maybe not quite, but very close. And so the idea that this loophole could be used in multiple stages was a great idea in theory, not a very good idea in practice. And in fact, we are still going through this process right now during leasing, opening and closing our last set of permits. It's a real challenge. And I think that it's a great thing, this 1 DC. It's critical to missing middle housing, but probably it comes along with major challenges if you try to do it more than once on the same project. We're almost at a time, and we want to have time for questions, but I'm just going to finish these last 2 slides. A bit of further learning here was, while we assumed at this time we had the capability of building these 3 Sheridans, we could call them, when I unconditionally purchased these 3 properties, the capital raise was much more significant. It was 3 times anything I'd done in the past, and I had still a short period of time to do it. And it was getting difficult and stressful, and it wasn't going so well. And so I had one investor who was keen to bring it to his network, and he had a lot of excitement for the project like I did, and he became a bit of a partner and an ally. And through his excitement and through the fact that he'd invested, he raised more than half of the rest of the $750,000 that we needed at that time. And it taught me just, having an ally in an investor is a great way to supplement your own raising abilities, and so that worked out really well, and it's something I've then since used many times, including at River and subsequent projects, bigger projects since then. And then the last thing is, again, I got to stress, just as you can see, every project I've proposed or we've discussed here has had delays. It's sort of be prepared for the delays. You may not need to model the delays in your pro forma. It may kill or hurt your pro forma too much, but just try to be prepared for delays that are beyond what you expect, and how you're going to manage those, and how you're going to manage your investor during those times. And we were never quite prepared for the delays that came our way, years into our career. So I think it's going to happen, and you gotta plan for it as well as you possibly can. So the final learning, the final intangible benefit of scaling up to Bloor was it allowed us to scale up to this Project River. And so, each project kind of gave us the confidence to try something new each time. We never quite knew exactly what we were doing or how it was going to go. And that's something I really wanted to convey in this presentation, was that we're now 15 years into this business, but we're always still, making mistakes and trying to figure things out and improving. And it's not, being perfect isn't the goal. It's just having some good ideas and being a bit creative, and then being persistent. So that's the end of the presentation. Here's a bunch of ways you can contact me and Katie, and we'll send you these slides, plus slides with more detail, plus other information on the project if you're interested, and also happy to do follow-up calls or meetings and help teach you guys stuff that will truly help you in your career, or kick off a career, or take the next step in your career. I'm a big, giant believer in missing middle housing, along with NAMA, and it's really important for the city. And ultimately, the final thing to convey is it is profitable, and the prevailing myths out there about a lack of profitability on small projects are often overblown or misinterpreted. They are not profitable for giant corporations with huge amounts of staff and overhead, but they are profitable for startup corporations or individuals pursuing these types of projects.
James, that was wow. And just, I'm getting texts and emails saying this is incredible. It was incredible. Thank you for being, by the way, so honest and direct and open about it. I do not take it for granted. We do have some questions. I'm going to modify one of the questions because I don't want you to answer a specific, units count or any of that. But what would be your rule of thumb for the timeline that goes over and contingency? So you look at a project and you say, okay, good scenario, bad scenario, X amount of months.
Sure. So I think trying to find like a precedent in your own portfolio or somebody else's portfolio might be a good place to start. But I'm more used to sort of the scale of projects we're on right now, which I think a lot of people misinterpret to be 2.5-year timelines, but they're really more like 5-year timelines. But scaling, thinking back to something like Sheridan, like, if I just take that as an example, I would, before we thought something like that could be completed in 18 or 24 months. Now I think that's incorrect. I think you're going to need 6 months for building permits, plus 6 months at least for minor variants, in addition to the building permit process. They're not exactly parallel. They're sort of kind of parallel, kind of not. So you need a year for any kind of variance and building permit to be in your hand. And then 12 months is, unless it's a very small project, I think 12 months is potentially an underestimation for construction. But if you think you can do 12, then you're going to have to add at least 6 for contingency. And if you want to be sort of in your, maybe not on paper, but add another 6 for extra contingency for your own internal planning. And so you're looking at 2 years for what you think you can accomplish in 1 year. And then if you're doing rental, which I didn't mention, I guess, but I should have, everything we've done is rental. We've only ever done rental. You're going to need to, especially like kind of COVID, post-COVID, this whole like leasing shouldn't be rushed. So you got to appropriately allot 3 or 6 or 9 or 12 months for leasing. Well, 3, you can't really do anything but maybe a 2 or 3 unit project in 3 months. So anything more than 2 or 3 units, you should allot 6 months for leasing, in my view. And then, if you're thinking about selling at the end, you're not really going to sell it at the very moment of stabilization. You're going to then need time for it to kind of have a few months of stabilized cash flow, negotiations with lenders. So you're looking at another 6-month post-stabilization to realistically get to a sale or some kind of takeout financing event. So, quickly, a little tiny minor variance project just went from maybe you think 18 months to 12 plus 24 plus another year of leasing. It's 4 years for, a relatively small project. So this is the way that I think about it. So if anyone's thinking, 12, 18 months, like, I think it's a great thing to have aggressive goals. And we have done it. We have actually done 12 and 18-month projects, more than one, but we kept them really small and contained and controlled and focused. And we did no thinking about changing type of project or re-strategizing. Yes, hopefully that helps.
Could you please re-explain the loophole used in the sequence, the development for the Bloor project?
Sure. So when you, and again, things are changing constantly at the city, but I think it still generally applies in all of Toronto. When you apply for a building permit for a project that has, say, 2, 3, 4 units, doesn't matter how many are existing, but they have to be legally existing, you can add one more. So you could, if it's currently a 3-unit triplex, your next permit could add a 4th unit by dividing 2 units up into, sorry, Nami, you're muted. I didn't hear that. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, perfect. You could divide up 1 into 2, or you could even add an addition to add the 1. You have to also go within a bunch of other zoning ordinances. So, you might be caught by some other thing like setbacks or GFA, but you can, if you're not triggering other minor variances, you can add a unit and not pay the development charge. It's in the development charges bylaw. Sorry, it's not in the zoning bylaws, in the development charges bylaw that you can do this. But you must close that permit before you do it again. This is why it's extremely difficult and not recommended to do more than one on one project, because you actually have to build the whole project with the extra unit, everything, finish every little nook, cranny, and corner, close your building permit, and then if you want to add another unit, open another building permit and restart construction. And this causes tons of issues with contracts, with subcontractors, with momentum, with project fatigue, with, if you get one thing wrong and then your plan falls apart. There's a lot of issues with the loophole, but using it for 1 unit is a very, very good idea. You can even do this if you have a 20-unit apartment building. You can add 1 more, make it 21.
What type of trades tend to have that's an interesting question, the most difficulty performing when it comes to a 4-story redevelopment?
So definitely the whole sprinkler fire safety stuff becomes more complicated. So your sprinkler and life safety trade is one that's a big change. Framing is the biggest challenge we had at Sheridan when we first did this first 4-story, was framing the connections, and the things like wind and shear start to become more strict. Like your walls are going to have these metal cross braces, so I think framing and life safety, and there's some that don't really change, right? Like electrical and mechanical, not too much of a change that I can think. And then just like whoever has to work at height. So your siding guys, your window guys, your roofing guys, like they all may be they need special licenses to work at heights. And so, like one of our siding guys couldn't actually get up there without breaking Ministry of Labor code. So he actually trained himself during this project. We trained a few guys on Part 4 height issues. So yeah, it's related to the height. And I think those really are the main things. It seems there's other things crop up that you can't think of right now. They just kind of happen. It's other challenges.
Just to be respectful of everyone, Tom, I'm going to ask you one last question, and we'll wrap it up, because I think we have 4 more, but we'll stick to one. As a developer, what incentives would you like to see to allow for more market or affordable rent in the missing middle buildings, even if it was less than 10% of the units? And I will just say that CMHC now announced one of their solutions labs, so especially a solution lab for the missing middle, and how to create missing middle that is affordable. So it's a grant program. I think it's very interesting. They have a webinar at 1 p.m. So in less than an hour. So it's a very interesting question. So James, what would you say is the key for that?
What would I like to see?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that DCs are a big one. If we could get a couple more exemptions. So for example, maybe 2 or 3 at a time for certain defined missing middle small projects. I think development charges were a huge shock to me when I went from just doing sort of internal renovations of 1, 2, and 3 unit projects to realizing that when you add units, you have to pay these huge monumental taxes. So I think for this startup developers, I think DCs present a real problem and a real challenge. And if there could be some exemptions there, that would spark more missing middle housing. I do think that. I don't know if there could be some certainty on property taxes for affordable housing units, like some kind of significant decrease. The cash flow that these projects derive is really what the value, how you value them. And so when you go and build affordable units and small projects, the affordable component becomes a big significant component of the project. So like 1 unit in a 3 unit or a 5 unit becomes not 10%, but 20 or 33% of your income. And so one of the biggest offsetting factors to income is the property tax. It's the single biggest expense. And so any kind of certainty on that, we're always shooting the start at, it's like you're throwing a dart on property taxes because you don't get reassessed until your project is done long time. So we use some consultants to help us, but nobody has any certainty about what that property tax is going to be. And I think it's just one more challenge to go, I don't know about this affordable thing, because my cash flow is going to be hurt X. And so that's something that I think I know it's done elsewhere in the United States, property tax breaks for affordable housing. And so I think I'd love to see more breaks on DCs and then some certainty on property tax limitations for affordable units. And that could be a big driver.
Thank you. I think that was a good question and answer to wrap this session up. And we're wrapping a 2-day seminar, 6 hours. I think 8 or 9 speakers, not including the architect. So that puts in 13 speakers. James, thank you very much. That was an amazing last session for this webinar. So thank you. It was very insightful. And thank you everyone who stuck around in those 2 days and for your lovely emails that I received last night. Thanking me for putting it together. So thank you for being here. Stay in touch, connect with me on LinkedIn. Thanks again, James. Bye, everyone.